The desert stretched endlessly under a pale horizon. The sun pressed down on the land like a weight, and the wind carried whispers of dust across the barren ridges. Every sound seemed distant, muffled by the vastness of the wilderness. John Carver, a rancher molded by years of hardship, rode his tired horse back toward camp. He had been scouting the edges of his property, counting cattle, checking for broken fences, and keeping an eye out for rustlers. Life was a constant grind, yet he had grown used to it. Survival in the West meant endurance, and endurance was something John had in plenty. As he topped a rise, his sharp eyes caught movement in the distance. At first it looked like a mirage, something shifting through the heat waves. But then the figure stumbled, dropping to one knee before rising again. It was no trick of light. Someone was out there, dragging themselves through the sands. John tightened his reins and rode closer. He approached slowly, rifle ready, his instincts sharpened by years of living in a land where strangers could mean trouble. When he finally drew close enough, his breath caught. It was a woman. Not just any woman, but an Apache girl. Young yet battle-hardened, barefoot and dressed in buckskin torn nearly to shreds. Dust streaked her skin. Blood smeared her arms. Bruises darkened her shoulders and ribs. Yet despite her battered body, her eyes burned like fire. John halted, watching her sway on unsteady legs. She met his gaze without flinching. Even in weakness, she stood proud, unbent. He asked her name. She gave none. Her lips trembled as she whispered hoarsely, "I can warm you tonight." The words struck him oddly. Not seductive, there was no softness in them. They were survival itself, spoken with raw dignity, a plea that was not begging, an offering that was not surrender. John's instincts screamed caution. An Apache in his camp could bring trouble. Her people might be nearby. Enemies could follow. Yet something about her froze him in place. Something in the way she held herself, bruised, broken, but still unyielding, made it impossible to turn away. He dismounted and offered her a hand. She took it without hesitation, her grip strong despite her exhaustion. Back at camp, John lit a fire. The girl sat across from him, her posture straight, her eyes watchful. She said little, but her silence was not empty. It was filled with weight, with stories untold. Every glance, every shift of her body, spoke of pain endured and battles fought. John asked her again how she came to be wandering the desert. She only looked toward the horizon, where faint smoke rose in the distance. He understood enough without words. Somewhere out there a village had burned. Somewhere families had been scattered. Revenge and bloodshed lingered on the air. He wanted to ask more, but stopped himself. Words would not change what had already been lost. The night grew colder. The desert was cruel like that, scorching by day, freezing by night. She kept her promise. She leaned close to him near the fire, her body warmth steady, her head lowered. It was not intimacy in the way men often craved. It was the simple act of survival, like wolves pressed together in snowstorms. John found himself staring into the flames, wondering why he had not ridden past and left her to the fate of the desert. But when he looked at her, bruised and silent yet alive with a fierce spirit, he understood. She reminded him of himself, alone, wounded by life, surviving not by choice but because surrender was unthinkable. The night passed slowly. Coyotes howled in the distance. The fire crackled and burned low. At dawn, the light revealed her more clearly. Her face was streaked with dirt and blood, but her eyes still burned. She stood tall despite the pain in her body. And in that light, John realized something had changed. She was no longer just an Apache girl who had stumbled into his life. She had become a mirror of his own loneliness, a living reminder that even in the harshest land, strength could be found in unexpected places. His mind warned him danger, risk, conflict, but his heart whispered something else. If he let her go, he might lose the one chance he had to change the path of his life. And so, without saying it aloud, John made a decision. The girl would stay. Whatever storms came with her, he would face them. Because in her fierce eyes, he saw a story greater than his own. The days that followed built a rhythm John had never known before. The girl spoke little, but she did not need words to command presence. Every movement she made revealed something about her. Every gesture, a reminder that she had been shaped by hardship. When she rested, she always scanned the horizon first, as though expecting danger at every turn. When she ate, she did so carefully, never wasting a crumb, as if each bite might be her last for a long while. When she worked, she moved with efficiency, sharpening sticks into weapons, tending the fire, carrying herself with the poise of someone who had never been allowed the luxury of weakness. John had thought himself self-sufficient. Years of ranching had hardened him, yet as he watched her move through the world, he realized his knowledge was narrow. He could mend fences, herd cattle, and handle a rifle, but she lived by instincts older and sharper. Where he saw a barren desert, she saw signs in the earth, trails in the dust, shadows on the ridges. She read the land like a book he had never learned to open. One evening, while the fire's glow flickered against the desert rocks, the sound of hoofbeats broke the stillness. John's hand went to his rifle instantly. The girl froze, every muscle tense, eyes flashing like a wolf's at the scent of danger. Out of the darkness rode three men. Their faces were shadowed beneath their hats, but their voices carried the weight of greed and cruelty. These were not friends. They were the kind who prowled the edges of law, always looking for what they could take. They stopped at the edge of the firelight, their eyes falling on the girl almost immediately. One of them spat into the dirt and sneered. "Looks like Carver's taken in a squaw," he said, his tone thick with contempt. John said nothing at first. His jaw tightened. The men laughed among themselves, whispering crude remarks, not seeing her as a person, but as a prize to be stolen. And then John spoke, his voice low, steady, edged with the steel he hadn't realized was inside him. "She's with me." The words surprised even him. He had not meant to say them, but they came from somewhere deep, somewhere primal. The men burst out laughing. "With you?" one mocked. "Hell, we'll take her off your hands." Before John could raise his rifle, the girl stood. She rose slowly, her body coiled like a spring, every muscle etched in the firelight. The bruises and scars on her skin did not hide her strength. They announced it. She stepped between John and the riders, her gaze fixed on them with the ferocity of a predator ready to strike. For a moment the men faltered. Something about her made them hesitate. But greed pushed hesitation aside. One man dismounted and strode forward, his hand reaching for her arm. He never reached her. She moved with lightning speed, faster than John could have imagined. Her strike landed sharp and brutal, dropping him into the dirt. Blood stained the sand. The other two shouted, reaching for their weapons. John's rifle cracked, echoing across the desert. A bullet tore through the night and the chaos exploded. The girl fought like fire itself, fists, kicks, and wild strikes fueled not by rage alone, but by the unyielding will to survive. John fired again, his shots controlled, his mind sharpened by the realization that he was no longer fighting for himself alone. When the dust settled, the men were fleeing, their bravado shattered, their pride bleeding into the desert sand. One limped as he rode, another cursed, and the third did not look back. Silence returned, broken only by the heavy breathing of John and the girl. The fire crackled and the desert seemed to exhale, as though even the land had been holding its breath. John lowered his rifle, his hands trembling slightly. He turned to look at her. She was still standing tall, her chest rising and falling, her eyes bright with the light of someone who had faced death and driven it away. That night, the fire burned low, but the air between them carried a different weight. John no longer saw her as a wounded stranger. She was his equal, his partner, perhaps even stronger than he was. For the first time she spoke more than a few words. Her voice was steady yet laced with sorrow. She told him of her people, how her tribe had been scattered, how soldiers and raiders had left nothing but ashes where her home had once stood. She told him of running, hiding, watching everything she loved fall to ruin. "I do not wander for rescue," she said. "I wander to remember why I must still fight." Her words struck him deep. John had always thought survival was enough. But now, listening to her, he realized survival meant nothing without purpose. In her he saw a reason, not just to endure, but to live. The desert was cruel. The West was wild. Men like the riders would return again and again, chasing greed and blood. But as John looked at her across the firelight, he felt a calm he had not known in years. She was not his possession. She was not his burden. She was his strength. Whatever storms came, they would face them together. And in that silent vow, John understood the truth of legends. Great stories are not written by those who walk alone, but by those who find in another soul the fire that refuses to be extinguished.